v. The government of Her Britannic Majesty pledges itself to see that there is entire freedom of commerce and navigation, without distinction of flags, in the territory of North Borneo administered by the British North Borneo Company. If the governments of Great Britain and Germany do not refuse their adhesion to the present protocol within 15 days from this date, or if they notify their acceptance before the expiration of said period, through their undersigned representatives, the present declarations shall then come into force. Done at Madrid the 7th of March, 1885. Sealed. Signed, J. Eldrayan. Sealed. Signed, C. Soames. Sealed. Signed, R. B. D. Moyer. Appendix XXI. Decree of the General Government in regard to payment of tribute by Sulus, March 1, 1894. Office of the Governor-General of the Philippines. Manila, March 1, 1894. In view of the obligation incurred by the Sultan of Sulu by virtue of which the Moros of all the Sulu archipelago have to pay from the first day of January of next year, 1 real each, as a tribute of vassalage. And since it is necessary to organize this service in a regular manner and in harmony with the customs of the races living there, I decree the following. 1. The Sultan of Sulu shall direct at once all the datas and chiefs of the Moro Rancherias to make up lists of the names of the inhabitants composing each aggregation, giving therein, besides the names, the status of each individual. 2. These partial lists shall be fused in one single general census which the Sultan of Sulu shall deliver to the politico-military governor of that archipelago before October 1 of the current year. 3. The interpreters of Holo, Siasi, Tatuan, and Bangao shall assist the Sultan in the work of making up these lists and shall translate them into Spanish. And for this extra work they shall receive the allowances designated below, the amounts being deducted from the total proceeds of the liege money above referred to. Allowances. To the interpreter of Holo. 20. Per month. To the junior linguist of Holo. 6. Due. To the interpreter of Siasi. 8. Due. To the interpreter of Tatuan. 8. Due. To the interpreter of Bangao. 8. Due. 4. As soon as the lists are completed and have been examined by the politico-military governor of Sulu, certified copies shall be sent to this office. 5. The collection of the tribute shall be made by means of certain special cédulas, which in due time will be furnished to the Sultan for distribution, who will collect the amounts paid in and deliver them over in specie at the office of the politico-military governor of Sulu. 6. The total proceeds from the said tribute, after deducting the amount of the allowances to the interpreters, shall be devoted for the present to the development of the establishments of Holo, and especially to the construction of roads. To be communicated. Blanco. Appendix XXI. Royal communication relative to the rights of foreigners on the pearl fisheries of Sulu. Manila, December 25, 1895. His High Excellency the Minister of Colonial Affairs. Excellent Sir, in compliance with the royal order communicated under date of the 23rd of October last, I have the honor to send to Your Excellency a copy of the previous record of investigations transmitted by the office of this General Government, together with the report of the office of the Secretary, the remittance of which Your Excellency requests. The inquiry formulated by the politico-military governor of Sulu, arising out of a resolution of the Fishery Board of the Naval Station relative to the order prohibiting foreign subjects from engaging in the pearl fisheries in the waters of the Sulu archipelago, did not call for a speedy resolution nor a close study, it being sufficient to bring the matter to the knowledge of Your Excellency without entering deeply into the question involved, in order not to prejudice the resolution of the same, leaving to the supreme judgment of His Majesty's government the entire appreciation of its reach and consequences. As the only authority acquainted with the demands of our international relations and the influence thereon of a decision in regard to a matter of such recognized importance as is that of the interpretation to be given to Declaration I of the Sulu Protocol of May 11 of 1877, contained in Article 4 of the Protocol between Spain, Germany, and Great Britain, signed in Madrid on March 7, 1885, hence the brevity of the data contained in the communications above referred to and even the forbearance of this office from expressing a concrete opinion, in any case, not called for, in regard to a question as vital as it is complex. But circumstances, which are always superior to every will and every calculation, now make prompt action necessary, and not only forbid any delay, but impose upon this general government the duty of emitting an opinion which shall complement the data furnished by the office of the Secretary of the same. Which data were less extensive and explicit than they would certainly have been had not a respect for the free initiative of the supreme government acted as a restraining influence. The incident arising out of the presence in the city of Holo of the British subject Mr. H. W. Dalton, from Sandokan, awaiting the arrival of a fleet of boats of light tonnage belonging to the English concern, the Pearling and Trading Company, Ltd., of which he is the representative for the purpose of using the same in the mother-of-pearl shell fishery, which fact I communicated to your Excellency by cablegram on the 3rd of the current month, makes more urgent the sovereign decision in regard to the concrete point as to whether foreign subjects are allowed to engage in the pearl fishery in the archipelago of Sulu. In the judgment of this office, which has, on various occasions, inspired only by a regard for the best interests of the nation, expressed the opinion that the Sulu Protocol is too prejudicial to the said interests to permit of the points of doubtful interpretation in the same being interpreted liberally. The point in regard to the right of fishery which foreigners lay claim to exercise freely in waters under the jurisdiction of our sovereignty, is not a doubtful one at all, but is entirely contrary to their pretensions. The claims are founded, according to the statements of those who agree with the views which they involve, in Declaration I of the said Protocol of 1877, reproduced in the Protocol of 1885 and in that signed in Rome in the same year, relating to the Caroline and Pelew archipelagos. This declaration runs as follows, ratified by Article 4 of the second of these important diplomatic documents. The direct commerce and trade of boats and subjects of Great Britain, of Germany, and of the other powers, is declared, and shall be absolutely free in the archipelago of Sulu and in all its parts, as also the right of fishery, without prejudice to the rights recognized as belonging to Spain in the present protocol, in conformity with the following declarations. 3. At points occupied by Spain in the archipelago of Sulu, the Spanish government may establish imposts, and sanitary and other regulations of whatever kind, during the effective occupation of the said points. From the transcript it is evident that Spain may regulate the exercise of the right of traffic and commerce, not with the purpose of restricting, and much less of denying, the principle of commercial liberty recognized in Declaration I, but with that of conditioning the exercise of that right in such a way that her own rights as a sovereign nation shall not be infringed. And what she may do in regard to mercantile trade, with greater reason she may and should do in everything referring to the right of fishery, a right which is declared only in general terms, and one of which the protocol does not treat except in making the affirmation of the principle itself, whereas in regard to commerce, it descends to minute details. And this could not be otherwise, for anything else would be equivalent to impairing the sovereignty of Spain. And this, in an agreement in which this sovereignty is openly recognized and proclaimed, would presuppose a contradiction so palpable and absurd that it is not worth while even to discuss it. Spain, as a sovereign and independent state, holds and exercises her sovereignty not only in her territories and on the coasts of the same, but in her jurisdictional waters, and can, therefore, regulate the exercise therein of any right granted to foreign subjects, and may, even, in the exercise of her sovereignty, prohibit the enjoyment of such right altogether. This is an indisputable principle of international law, though there is nothing to prevent a state from limiting the same in favor of another or other states. But it is a sine qua non condition to this that there shall be an express and clear declaration of her will on this point, and no one can reasonably affirm that Spain has made in the Sulu Protocols, neither in that of 1877, nor in that of 1885, a total or partial surrender of this right in regard to that of fishery. There is, it is true, a declaration in general terms that the fisheries are absolutely free in the archipelago of Sulu. But this absoluteness of the principle is immediately qualified by the condition that it shall be without prejudice to the rights recognized as belonging to Spain in the protocol. And it has already been pointed out that one of these rights, the principal one and that which contains all the others, the right of sovereignty, is proclaimed and recognized at the head of the agreement. Outside this declaration in general terms, there will not be found in all the protocol a provision or regulation referring to the exercise of the right of fishery, and much less a concrete and express declaration on the part of Spain that she will permit the exercise thereof freely on her coasts and in her territorial waters. To permit of this a concrete, clear, and definite declaration would be necessary, such as is to be found in the Morocco Treaty, signed on November 30, 1861. Article 57 of which establishes qualifiedly, that Spanish subjects shall have a right to fish along the coasts of the Moroccan Empire. And even so, in Article 60 of the same treaty, it is stipulated that, in order to facilitate the coral fishery, in which the Spaniards engage on the coast of Morocco, fishers shall pay the sum of 150 Spanish dollars for each coral fishing boat. And that through the representative of Spain they shall request permission from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of His Majesty the Sultan, who shall issue the necessary authorization. From which it may be seen that even in the case of declarations in regard to the right of fishery which are concrete, clear and definite, there is needed, for the free exercise of the same, something more than a declaration in general terms. Such as is that contained in the Sulu Protocol of 1877. Furthermore, it is always customary in international agreements which refer to fishery rights to lay down regulations and provisions which shall regulate the exercise of such rights, as is proved by a multitude of agreements. Among which are, that already cited of Morocco, that of February 18, 1886, between Spain and France regarding the fishery and navigation of the Bidasoa, in which the right of oyster fishing is restricted, its absolute prohibition being made possible. As also that of 1889 ratifying the preceding one, the Portuguese Convention of March 27 of 1893 and the Coast Police and Fishery Regulations, as well as that of August 22 of 1894, in regard to the fisheries in the waters of the Algarves, etc. All of which is well known by the illustrious government of His Majesty, and attention is called to it here only in support of the opinion maintained, namely, that the right to authorize, condition, restrict, and even prohibit the engagement in fishery on its coast and in its jurisdictional waters is inherent in the sovereignty of an independent state. And if it has this right in regard to fisheries in general, with greater reason must it preserve and exercise the same in regard to oyster fisheries, by reason of the changes which may be produced in the sea bed. And even for the purpose of preserving the breeding grounds of the precious pearl shell mollusk, the Avicula margaritifera, the banks being the property of the nation, and like all its territory, inalienable and non-prescriptible. Both so that they shall not be exhausted and that their exploitation may be reserved for the national industry. From the preceding, written with less detail than would have been the case had the pressure of time permitted, it may easily be inferred that, in the opinion of this general government, Spain, in spite of Declaration I of the Sulu Protocol, perhaps it would be more correct to say, by virtue of that very declaration, the terms of which really determine the meaning of Declaration 3 and Article 1 of the treaty, preserves intact her right as a sovereign nation to restrict, condition, and even prohibit engagement in the oyster fishery on her coasts and in her jurisdictional waters, without further limitations than those which she may deem expedient to self-impose. Admitting her rights as a sovereign state, there arises a question of a political nature, which the circumstances above indicated convert into a problem demanding an early resolution. To what extent should Spain exercise this right? On this point, the views of the general government will be expressed as concisely as possible and with the soberness demanded both by the respect due to the high prerogatives of the public authorities and by an ignorance of many of the elements which enter into the question, without a knowledge of which it is difficult to determine to what extent it is expedient to restrict the exercise of the right to engage in the oyster fisheries which foreign subjects claim to exercise freely in the Sulu archipelago. A pretension which this general government regards as entirely opposed to the rights of Spain and her moral and material interests in the Far East. Our prestige with the Malay races here, our moral influence over these semi-civilized Mohammedan people, who recognize no right or supremacy but that of might, demand that Spain, as a colonizing nation, shall maintain the integrity of her sovereignty and shall not seem to be subjugated to the will of other powers, as would appear if, in her territories and on her coasts, with the knowledge and permission of her authorities and of her warships, and without even heeding them, foreigners should perform acts which, like that of engaging in the mother-of-pearl fishery, being contrary to our material interests, cannot be carried out without paying tribute to the Moro sultans and chieftains themselves. There is no doubt that the need for preserving cordial relations with Germany and England and for maintaining the most perfect understanding between the European powers in anticipation of some concerted action in regard to the empires of China and of Japan, which will render necessary in the future the expansive policy of the latter towards the south, as well as the hegemony claimed by the latter in the Orient. Counsel a circumspect international policy and a moderate exercise of our sovereign rights in the archipelago of Sulu. And for this reason, perhaps it would be inexpedient to forbid the right of fishery to foreign subjects, as such action would certainly give rise to diplomatic questions and remonstrances, which should be avoided at any cost. But this general government deems it indispensable to condition and regulate the exercise of this fishery right, especially in so far as it relates to the pearl-producing oyster, the exploitation of which should be governed by considerations of our prestige and of the advantage and benefit of our material interests. Supported therefore by our right of sovereignty, by international practice, and by the terms of Declarations I and III of the Protocol of 1877 and of Articles I and IV of that of 1885, there should be issued certain coast police and fishery regulations for the Sulu archipelago, laying down clearly the relations which are to exist between the Spanish government and foreign subjects engaging in the fishery industries along our coasts and in our jurisdictional waters, which industries should not be engaged in, especially in the case of the oyster, without the necessary authorization of the Spanish authorities, and after the payment of the corresponding industrial patent or license, or of the dues which it may be deemed expedient to exact. Much more might be said in regard to this important question, as unexpectedly presented as it is urgent of resolution, given the conditions created by the claim of the British subject Mr. H. W. Dalton. And this general government appreciates fully the deficiency of its suggestions, which will be advantageously supplemented by the great wisdom of His Majesty's government, its exalted patriotism, and the solicitous care that it gives to everything touching the high interests of the nation, by which elevated sentiments they are inspired. Appendix XI. Royal Directions relative to the treatment of foreigners engaged in pearl fishing in the Sulu waters, March 23. Colonial Office. Excellent Sir, examined by this office of the Government the papers transmitted by Your Excellency with the official communication No. 1967, of September 16 last, in the question raised by the politico-military governor of Sulu, by reason of a communication addressed to the same by the office of the Commander-General of the Naval Station at Manila, directing the prohibition of the mother-of-pearl fishery in the waters of Sulu and the Carolines. Studied also the report of the General Government, and that of the Council of Administration of the Philippines, and heard also the illustrious opinion of the Department of State, to secure which the papers were sent there, accompanied by the Royal Order of the 7th of January last. Bearing in mind that our prestige among the natives in those islands would perforce suffer seriously if foreigners were to perform, without any intervention on the part of our authorities, acts, which, like that of engaging in the mother-of-pearl shell fishery, they cannot carry on without paying tribute to the Moro sultans and chieftains. Though it is not less true that the absolute prohibition of the right of fishery to foreigners would arouse, as wisely foreseen by Your Excellency, diplomatic remonstrances based upon the Protocol of Sulu of March 7, 1886. His Majesty the King, whom God protect, the Queen Regent of the Kingdom acting in his name, has seen fit to direct that Your Excellency be informed that he has seen with pleasure the tact and prudence with which this question has been dealt with. In the first place by Your Excellency, and afterwards by all the authorities who have intervened in the same. That so long as the representative of the English Pearling and Trading Company, the captains of their boats, or other foreigners, Do not urge with importunity the right to carry on the industry of the mother-of-pearl shell fishery within the zone of jurisdictional waters and at occupied places. An endeavor must be made to prevent their doing so, in order, if possible, to set a precedent favorable to our interests. And that in the event of their insisting, it will be necessary to permit them to engage in the industry of the mother-of-pearl fishery, with the obligation to submit in so doing to the rules and regulations now in force or which may be put into force hereafter. It is also the wish of His Majesty that Your Excellency be apprised of the expediency of formulating, with the greatest possible dispatch, coast police and fishery regulations for the archipelagos of Sulu and the Carolines, in which regulations care must be taken not to make special mention of the protocols, nor to recognize expressly the rights of foreigners, and, on the other hand, not to depart from the terms of the provisions of these international agreements. So that in the event of any foreigners claiming the right in question, they shall not be able to elude compliance with the regulations by basing their pretensions on the terms of the said protocols. For all of which Your Excellency will place yourself in harmony with the competent authorities whose duty it is to take cognizance of this matter, submitting afterwards for the approbation of this office drafts of the coast police and fishery regulations above referred to. By royal order I communicate the above to you for proper action. God protect Your Excellency many years. Madrid, March 23, 1896. Tomás Castellano, rubricated. To the Honorable the Governor-General of the Philippine Islands. Appendix Ziv. La Torre's views on the policy that should be adopted in Mindanao and Sulu, January 11, 1893. Office of the Governor-General of the Philippines. A seal with the inscription, Office of the Captain-General of the Philippines. Headquarters. Excellent Sir, at all times the condition of the unsubdued regions of the island of Mindanao and, in general, of the whole archipelago, has occupied the close attention of the Governors-General of these islands, and they have studied, according to their respective views, the best methods for the complete subjection of the same. For my part, I have meditated deeply upon everything relating to this important matter, and judging both from past experience and from observations that I have been able to make personally. As I apprised Your Excellency after my return from a visit to the aforementioned island on May 29 last, I believe it is evident that the adoption of the same system for the subjection of different races will not be productive of good results. In the island of Luzon, a properly understood policy of conciliation, accompanied by slight displays of force, will be successful in conciliating and subduing the people sooner or later. For it may be observed at once that here there does not exist that great racial antagonism which nearly always makes compromise impossible. Such a policy, linked with prudence and particularly with justice on the part of the delegates of authority, will always be productive of great results, aside from the fact that there are here many villages whose inhabitants are not warlike, but, on the contrary, are docile, and await only some slight indication on our part to regard us as protectors and allies against their enemies. Much has already been done in this direction, as is shown by the many politico-military provinces existing in this island, but we should not stop in this island of progress. And in order to carry forward and consummate the complete subjugation of the extensive districts not yet subdued, troops must be detailed, not in very large numbers, but still in numbers sufficiently large to effect appreciably the service equally necessary in other regions of the archipelago. This is one of the reasons which make requisite an increase in the army force stationed here. Further, if the number of the commandantias is to be increased, it is obvious that, in order to garrison them, more troops are needed. I have pointed out the need there is for employing different methods for the subjection of the different races. And in fact, in regard to the races inhabiting Mindanao, I believe that it is obvious and unquestionable that favorable results will never be secured without employing methods other than those of attraction. The Moro race is completely antithetic to the Spanish, whether the latter be peninsular or indigenous, and will ever be our eternal enemy. The past proves clearly that those ostensible and ephemeral submissions, apparently guaranteed by oaths and agreements, do not bind the Moros in the slightest degree. For, knowing nothing of the first principles of good faith and loyalty, they do not hesitate to break their promises whenever a favorable opportunity offers and they think it possible to defeat our troops. They make a pretense of being trusting and attentive even to our smallest suggestions, but they are always watching for a good chance to open up hostilities, and will resort to treason and cunning. For these reasons it is well that they should know that we are the stronger, that our friendship suits their interests because we are backed by force, which is the only argument they can understand, that their friendship is of no moment to us. And that the instant they antagonize us, they will be promptly and severely punished. Having taken up this point of view, the policy that we should adopt may be inferred. It is not necessary to undertake operations on a large scale, or to open what might be termed a regular campaign, as has been done every 2 or 3 years in the past. But, with our troops established at a number of fortified places, it may be seen at once from what has been said above, that we ought to maintain them there at any cost, and that, abandoning an attitude entirely passive, we should advance little by little in our conquest, always establishing ourselves firmly on the territory conquered. In this way we shall, step by step, bring under our dominion a large area of territory, at the same time extending our sphere of influence towards the interior. Given the conditions above described, it will be understood at once how much we should lose in importance in the eyes of such an enemy if, in response to their frequent attacks, we confined ourselves entirely to a defensive policy. For they would interpret such an attitude as an indication of weakness. Consequently it is impossible for us to maintain an attitude of inactivity. Rather, taking advantage of the treacherous conduct of the enemy, we should castigate them by means of rapid and unexpected excursions lasting a few days. And for this purpose it is indispensable that small columns of troops be stationed at 2 or 3 well-chosen points. That the Moros are not disposed to be our friends is evident, and while frequent examples in the history of these islands, in addition to what has been said above, are sufficient to prove this assertion, it is further corroborated by the many dispatches I have addressed to your Excellency, apprising you of the attacks made by the Moros upon our troops and especially of the incidents which have taken place during the last months of the year 1892. These I will recapitulate succinctly, as they show that, far from breaking the rebels, the events have only increased their strength. On the morning of October 28, while a reconnaissance was being made at the post of Barras, the detachment making the same was attacked by some 50 or 60 Moros, who were awaiting them in ambush. The latter were, however, repulsed, and our troops being reinforced by a detachment from the fort, the enemy fled, leaving 5 dead on the field, besides 2 spears, 3 krises, 3 campilon, and 2 daggers. The losses on our side being 1 dead and 5 wounded. On the morning of November 9, again at the time of making a reconnaissance, at the post of Malabang, our men were attacked by some 60 Moros, who, being repulsed, fled, leaving 6 dead on the field, 3 others dying later. According to reports received, besides 4 campilon, 3 krises, 1 tabas, 1 lance, and 4 daggers. The losses of our side being 1 soldier killed and 6 wounded. These 2 posts being afterwards visited by the military commander of Illana Bay and the politico-military governor of Mindanao. By reason of reports having been received that some 1,000 Moros had banded together for the purpose of attacking these 2 places, they informed me that excellent discipline prevailed among the troops of the said garrisons, and that the Moros must have beaten a retreat, since they had not been seen in that country. On my part one have directed that the greatest possible vigilance, care, and watchfulness be exercised at all the posts, never losing sight of the fact that they are always in the presence of the enemy, as is proved by the frequency with which they have been attacked. I have ordered, further, that, when making reconnaissances or upon any other occasion when it is necessary to separate a detachment from the main body, the greatest number of soldiers that the circumstances permit be employed, so as to prevent a surprise or ambuscade, which aside from the direct loss that it entails, might have the effect of demoralizing the troops, and so of increasing the boldness and temerity of the enemy. I have given special instructions, too, that the officers display in the field the greatest possible energy, so as to keep up the spirits and confidence of the men. In the northern portion of Mindanao, between Iligan and Mumungan the Moros have also been active in making attacks, and although beaten in every case, thanks to the good discipline prevailing among the men and the judgment shown by the officers, who inspire the former with confidence and afford them a good example at all times, they still hope to have better luck in their future raids, as is proved by the dispatches received from the politico-military commander of Mumungan. These dispatches show that our soldiers no longer fear the Moro race, nor even the Juramentados, and that our men always await the attack of the enemy with great calmness and bravery, as is shown by the accounts of the frequent ambuscades laid and surprises attempted by the Moros. Already at the beginning of 1892 the attitude of the sultans and datus in the neighborhood of Mumungan was so questionable that Captain Abad, then commander of the fort there, having attempted to go up the river Agus, accompanied by only one officer and 4 men, thus in the guise of absolute peace, Datu Allah, of Balad, who is now our friend, stopped him when he approached his territory, telling him that although he wished to live at peace with us, he could not allow him to advance further, nor any part of our troops to do so. In spite of this, 2 months after this incident, General Castilla, following closely my instructions, and taking advantage of the circumstance foreseen by me, that upon his arrival at Mumungan he was visited by the neighboring datus and sultans, including the Sultan of Pantar, he announced to the latter, acting under instructions from me, his intention of returning the friendly visit. Leaving Mumungan early, in spite of a continuous heavy rainstorm, he reached Pantar at about 11 in the morning without making any stop, accompanied by Allah and another Datu. And while he was holding an affectionate interview with the Sultan of Pantar and the troops were resting, the captain of engineers, Navarro, made a clandestine inspection of the ground and took a rough sketch of the best site for the future fort, close to a bridge that can be built across the river Agus, with a turret or rough defensive fortification on the opposite bank. This done, General Castilla returned that same afternoon to Mumungan, which he reached before night, without having fired a shot, in spite of the predictions of the datus that he might easily meet with resistance on the road. Later, all the datus living in the region lying between Pantar and Iligan reiterated to me, personally, in May last, at Mumungan, and later to the military commander, their protestations of adhesion to Spain. Afterwards there came the visit that a goodly number of datus, among them the Datu of Pantar, made me in Manila, where they remained and were entertained during 15 days. And with the consistent approval of these, the road from Iligan to Mumungan was built, in consequence of which work the weekly attendance of Moros at the market of Iligan increased. And the Datu of Bucamar and another from Marawi presented themselves in that place. Thither also the Datu Ame Pakpak, now an old man, promised to send his son. The concurrence of Moros at that place was further increased by the assistance that was given to a wounded Moro. Until, at last, a solemn oath of allegiance was secured, being taken, in the presence of the aforementioned military commander, by a great number of datus and sultans, in accordance with their ritual. On November 8, the military commander of Mumungan, under the pretext of a wedding to which the Datu of Pantar had invited him and which he attended, made an inspection of the country in the neighborhood of the said rancheria of Pantar, lying to the south of Mumungan, and had an opportunity of seeing that, in conformity with the reports I had received, Pantar possessed advantageous conditions for the establishment there of another advance fort, the construction of which could be commenced upon the continuation and completion up to that point of the new road built from Iligan to Mumungan. But in spite of the good intentions of the military commander not to break into hostilities except in the last resort, in accordance with the positive instructions I had given him, he was unable to prevent his troops being attacked upon the return journey, and therefore they opened fire upon the enemy. Which proves once again the difficulty of following the path of conciliation and attraction with an enemy who pays absolutely no heed to reason. In spite of the fact that with this method there had been joined that of warning the neighboring Moros who professed to be so friendly, that the only genuine proof of adhesion to which I should give credit would be that of the moral and collective support of all of them against any act of aggression within their territory committed by Moros from other rancherias, whether in large or in small numbers. On November 25 I was informed by the same military commander that, while the convoy was transferring supplies from Mumungan to Iligan, there appeared a juramentado, who attempted to wound a soldier. But the latter, waiting for him with great calmness, defended himself valiantly, and the Moro was dispatched with the assistance of some other soldiers who came upon the scene. On the 10th of December I was informed that a detachment of the troops stationed at Mumungan, while on its way to the market of Iligan, was attacked by a body of 14 Juramantados who, however, were repulsed with a loss of 2 killed, while on our side, 1 man was lost. At Barras, also, while making the reconnaissance on December 10 there appeared a band of Moros in an attitude of hostility, but they were compelled to retire at the first volley from our troops. Nevertheless, 2 Juramantados separated themselves from the main body and attacked an equal number of our men. The latter awaited them firmly and killed them with bayonet thrusts. Another Moro was also slain while attempting a precipitate flight. Recently, on the 15th of December, the military commander of Mumungan, hearing of the intentions of the enemy, which were far from peaceable, determined, in order to guard against all contingencies, to continue the extension of the road and to complete and close the palisade around the new enclosure at the fort, made so as to accommodate the increased number of troops. For the first of these 2 purposes, he left the fort at 5:30 in the morning, well armed and ready to punish the Moros if they presented themselves, setting out with 150 men of the 73rd Regiment and 16 convicts. Besides a corporal and 8 persons of the 73rd in charge of a company of engineers, another company of the 73rd and 60 convicts, who marched without arms and equipped for work. At 10 o'clock in the morning the advance guard reached the entrance to the wood, and as the intention was to collect lumber that had already been cut and dragged to the road, the troops advanced. At this moment there appeared in the middle of the road some 800 Moros brandishing their arms and uttering war cries, who immediately retired to some defensive works which they had constructed out of the very logs above referred to. In view of this, our troops continued their march, opening fire at about 100 yards from the defensive works of the enemy, and in a little while, captured the same, routing the defenders, as well as some more of the enemy who appeared on the 2 flanks of the column, causing some 80 deaths. On our side we had 1 killed and 2 wounded convicts. After this incident, the said military commander made his way to Iligan without suffering any attack, in spite of the fact that the Moros had constructed other defensive works on the road, which latter were destroyed without any casualties. The conduct of the troops on this march was brilliant, and I wish to recommend to the consideration of your Excellency those who especially distinguished themselves. But I have again directed the military commander of Mumungan to avoid as far as possible all necessity for fresh combats, extending, but without any compromise of dignity, the policy of conciliation which I have so strongly recommended to him. From all the above your Excellency will understand with how much foresight I requested from the government of His Majesty, on the 24th of April last, permission to place on a war footing as many of the 7 regiments which make up the infantry in these islands as had not yet been placed on this footing, setting forth the estimated cost of the same in the plans which I sent for approval. And if the increase was necessary then, it is evident that at the present time it is much more necessary. For, as your Excellency will see from what I have communicated to you in this extensive document, the condition of the Moros, justifying the predictions made by me at that time, has become steadily more hostile as they never rest nor miss any opportunity of causing us the greatest possible harm, endeavoring to obstruct all the work we plan to carry out for the improvement of the means of communication between our present possessions. And while it is true that they are not successful in their attempts, still we must put a stop to their increasing audacity. I take the liberty again to call the attention of your Excellency to the absolute necessity of placing on a war footing the 3 regiments now on a footing of peace, in accordance with the permission already granted by the Department, without waiting until next July. In this way, without undertaking a regular campaign, as I have already stated, and without expense to the government, it will be possible to improve the present condition of things, which is gradually becoming somewhat discreditable to the honor of the flag. I do not doubt that your Excellency will so understand it, and I thank you in advance, in the name of this suffering army, for the immediate concession of the credit necessary for the reinforcement above mentioned. God protect your Excellency many years. Manila, January 11, 1893. Most excellent Sir, Eulogio Despejal. followed by a rubric. The most excellent the Minister of War. A copy. The acting colonel in command of headquarters. Pedro de Bascaran. A seal with the inscription, Office of the Captain General of the Philippines. Headquarters. A copy. Luis de la Torre, rubricated. The Philippine Islands, Blair and Robertson, 15, pages 93 to 100. A point and settlement on the north bank of the Mindanao River and at its mouth. A careful review of Ronquillo's reports and letters on his pacification of Mindanao shows an evident error in the use of the word Bueyan to signify the settlement or stronghold of the Sultan of Maguindanao. Bueyan here, and probably in Figueroa's report, too, is used in place of Maguindanao, which lay on the site occupied at present by Cotabato. Buizan was then the Sultan of Maguindanao and headed the opposition to Ronquillo's advance up the north branch of the Mindanao River. Sarungan, who is mentioned in this report, might have been a datu or subdatu of Maguindanao, not necessarily Sarungan, the Raja of Bueyan. The correct name is Sarungan. Kachil or Kachil is a Malay word signifying little or young, hence a youth of distinction or a younger prince of the royal line. A tributary of the Mindanao River which rises in Talayan, and empties at Tavern. The Philippine Islands, Blair and Robertson, 11, pages 135 to 139. Unsigned. Point or bay, not an island. Point or bay, not an island. The Strait of Sunda, which separates Java from Sumatra. The Philippine Islands, Blair and Robertson, 15, pages 190 to 196. This word is as commonly used with an L as with an R, as Sarungan. A strong wind south by west. Shields. This was the first piratical expedition made against the Spaniards by the inhabitants of the southern islands. Rizal. Barrantes, Guerras Piraticas, wrongly dates the abandonment of La Caldera and the incursion of the Moros 1590. Continuing, he says, the following year they repeated the expedition so that the Indians retired to the densest parts of the forests, where it cost considerable trouble to induce them to become quiet, for a woman, who proclaimed herself a sibyl or prophetess, preached to them that they should not obey the Spaniards any longer, for the latter had allied themselves with the Moros to exterminate all the Pintados. Native word for mountain. Those to whom land had been granted with control over the natives who worked on it. The island of Jamaras, southeast of Panay, and separated from it by the Strait of Iloilo. Probably gongs. Neither Stanley nor Rizal throws any light on this word. The Spanish dictionaries likewise fail to explain it, as does also a limited examination of Malay and Tagal dictionaries. 3 conjectures are open. 1. A derivative of tafadas, a species of mollusk, hence a conch. 2. A Malay or Tagal word for either a wind or other instrument. The Malay words for, to blow, sound a musical instrument, being tayup and tayupkan. 3. A misprint for the Spanish pifas, a possible shortened form of pifanos, signifying fifes. The Philippine Islands, Blair and Robertson, 15, pages 240 to 244, 264 to 268. Sailing vessels. The Philippine Islands, Blair and Robertson, XCI, pages 87, 88. Unsigned. A small vessel used as a tender to carry messages between larger vessels. The Philippine Islands, Blair and Robertson, 18i, pages 41 to 63. In the manuscript that we follow, the letter of March 31st is given second, while that of April 5th is given first. We have arranged them chronologically. Garo, probably the same as Garita, a fortified outpost. The translation of this passage seems to be, if God fights against a city, he who guards it watches in vain. The difficulty lies in a custodiret, which we translate as fights against. A Spanish measure of length which is about equal to 1 yard, English measure. The Gimbahans or Sulus of the interior mountains. Babuy, in their language, signifies pig. Apparently they called the Spaniards swine, as expressing the acme of contempt for their besiegers. Thanks be to God who has given us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Combs says, History Mindanao, Rihanna's ed. Column 264, that this queen, named Tuan Baluka, was a native of Basilan, and that she had acquired such ascendancy over her husband that the government of Sulu was entirely in her hands. This statement explains the presence of the Basilan men in the Sulu stronghold. Samboanga, the correct spelling is Samboangan. Culverins of small bore. This letter is unsigned. But the transcript of it made by Ventura del Arco places it with others ascribed to Barrios. See detailed accounts of the expedition against Holo, Sulu, in Combs's History Mindanao y Holo, Britannia and Patel's edition, COLS 349-368. Diaz's Conquistas, pages 388-401, Mario Velarde's History Filipinas, folios 92, 93, and La Concepcion's History Filipinas, v. pages 334-351. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. The Recoletos or Barefoot Augustinian Friars. Spanish Expedient, the collection of all the papers referring to a single subject. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. Maestre de Campo. The inhabitants of Coron, northeast Borneo, pagan pirates subdued by Sulu in 1769. Official designation of the Audiencia when assembled in executive session under the presidency of the Captain General. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. SP. Forzados, men compelled to row in the galleys, usually as punishment for crime. Manila. The shorter form of its title of La Siempre Noble y Leal Ciudad. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. A small sailing vessel. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. The Honorable East India Company. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. I.E., of the Sulus. S.P. Champagnes. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. N.S.U.S. Propios Bukes, i.e., of Sulu. This and the following statements are not correct. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. Though inaccurate and biased, the ideas expressed in this report represent the opinion and feelings of many Spanish officials who were connected with Moro affairs. The correct name is Abu Bakr. Such a statement is unduly biased. A Spanish magistrate. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. Vessels up to 80 feet length by 18 or 20 beam, made of wood, bamboo, nipa, and rattan. The Moros armed them by placing at the two sides lantacas and falconets, mounted on iron swivels, and at the bow and stern, cannon set in stout pieces of timber. The sails are usually of matting made of saguaron, a kind of palm leaf, spread on bamboo poles. Note in Montero y Vidal's History of the Piracy of the Mohammedan Malays. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. SP. Contaduria General. Personal registration fees. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. Settlements. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. The Gearling and Traden, Sick. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. From the Division of Archives, Executive Bureau, Manila. A term used by the Spaniards to designate certain governmental districts in the Philippines. Settlement. Diagrams. Diagram No. I. Sultans and Royal Datus of Sulu. Diagram No. 2. Datus of Sulu not descended from Abu Bakr. Colophon. Availability. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the included with this ebook or online at. This ebook is produced by the online distributed proofreading team at Najeeb M. Salibi's studies in Moro history, law, and religion, and the history of Sulu, often bound together in a single volume, provide an interesting insight in the traditions and history of the southernmost islands of the Philippines. Predominantly Muslim, this area was only nominally Spanish throughout much of its history, and its rulers were de facto independent until the middle of the 19th century. Part 1 of this work starts with translations of some fanciful genealogies, which trace back the ancestry of the Sulu sultans to Adam and Eve, and of course include the Prophet Muhammad. This is followed by translations of laws, and a history of the islands in Part 2. In a series of appendixes the text of a number of significant treaties are given, which, among others, show the historical roots of the Philippine claims on Sabah. The author, Dr. Najeeb Salibi, was born in 1870 in Souk al-Gharb, a town near Beirut, Lebanon. He studied at the American University in Beirut, and then at the Bellevue Medical School in the U.S. During the Spanish-American War, he served as a surgeon in the U.S. Army. He came to the Philippines on the USS Thomas in October 1900, and was sent to Mindanao because of his knowledge of Arabic. Although himself a Christian Arab, he quickly befriended many Muslims, and respected the Muslims, their religion and culture. He decided to remain in the Philippines after his assignment. He died in Baguio on December 18, 1935. This work first appeared as Volume 4 of the Ethnological Survey publications, printed in Manila by the Bureau of Public Printing. Part 1, Studies in Moro History, Law, and Religion, appeared in 1905, Part 2, The History of Sulu, followed in 1908. Scans of this work are available from the Internet Archive, copy. A reprint from by the Filippiana Book Guild, 1976 with new introduction and some additional materials, is also available, copy. Related Library of Congress Catalog page. Related Open Library Catalog page, for source. Related Open Library Catalog page, for work. Related WorldCat Catalog page. Encoding. Revision History. November 30, 2012 started. External references. This Project Gutenberg ebook contains external references. These links may not work for you. Corrections. The following corrections have been applied to the text. Page. Source. Correction. Level. Level. Of. Sometime. Sometime. Valiantly. Valiantly. Waistcoats. Waistcoats. Consumption. Consumption. Cortege. Cortege. Contended. Contented. 24th. Brilliant. Brilliant. Not in source.